What's going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Guys, we're going to talk here some over and under achievers from the Colts for the 2022 NFL season. I think most of you can probably have an idea before we even get into this topic about who have been some of the over and under achievers this year. No doubt that, from a standpoint that the defense for the Indianapolis Colts has been a whole heck of a lot better than the offensive side of things have, and all things in consideration, we know where it's going. But we'll go ahead and just start with this here. So, first things first, you have to mention the play of Zaire Franklin as an overachiever. I mean, this is a guy that signed a 3-year contract in the offseason. It's basically getting paid like $4 or $5 million a year, right? Or I think it might be a little more than that. I think it might be more like 5 or 6. But either way, you just signed him to an extension this offseason. He was a special teams captain coming into this year, just a backup linebacker for all intents and purposes. In 2021, had finished the year with 40 tackles and an interception. And this year had to take on the responsibility of taking over for all pro linebacker Shaquille Leonard, who is, by most people's standards, is the best linebacker in football. And to take on that responsibility of, hey, Shaquille's not playing the rest of the year, man. I mean, we need you to take over. We need you to be, the guy, right? And we need you to take over and lead this defense. And he had to take on that responsibility and really didn't have a choice. And of course, alongside Bobby Okereke, his other linebacker, Zaire Franklin put on a season this year. Folks, he finished the year with 160 tackles. He was amongst top 10 in total tackles for all linebackers this year. I mean, that is incredible. That's something that we talk about with Shaquille Leonard every single year, is him being amongst the top in tackles every single year. And Zaire Franklin did it to a T. I mean, this guy did it was averaging almost 10 tackles a game in this season. I mean, there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 games where he had at least 10 combined tackles. I mean, it's truly incredible what he was able to do. Also had 2 sacks on the year, forced a couple of turnovers in the meantime. I mean, for a linebacker that you're only paying $6 million a year to be amongst the top in tackles for your team, and to be thrust into a situation where he had to be the leader and just not have ever been in that position before. I mean, he has answered the call tenfold in what needed to be done for this defense. He has led it. He has played the part exactly as you want it. He has at times not been great this year, especially in the pass coverage of all things. But Zaire Franklin deserves a ton of respect for what he has done for this Indianapolis Colts defense this year, taking over in a situation where he needed to do that. So fantastic to Zaire Franklin. He's the first overachiever for this Indianapolis Colts team. Next one that we have is Rodney Thomas, the rookie out of Yale. This kid, again, had to come into a situation where, Julian Blackmon was out for a while and Nick Cross wasn't cutting it. So Rodney Thomas had to step in and has created multiple turnovers this year, 3 interceptions on the year, really doing a fantastic job in coverage all year long for being such a raw guy at the position. And, being only a 7th round draft pick, was a stud that Ballard found a way to get and has done a fantastic job for this Colts secondary. And to think he's only a rookie and he's doing what he's doing already, he looks like he's been part of this defense for multiple years. So fantastic by Rodney Thomas this year, doing what he has done. And for another guy in the secondary, we stick with Stephon Gilmore. And no doubt about it, an overachiever. A lot of people thought that Stephon Gilmore, including myself, thought that he was going to be a very good player. But there's been multiple times this year where Stephon Gilmore has been one of the biggest proprietors to us winning football games and has actually, sealed the deal on a few wins this year. Actually, 3 of the 4 wins that the Indianapolis Colts actually have, Stephon Gilmore was the guy that got tested at the end of games to be the one to end it, right? You talk about the Kansas City game. He got tested twice on that last drive, made a play on both. One ended up in an interception for somebody else that ended up being huge in the game-winning play for them. You talk about the Denver game, right? He had an interception in that game, and he was the one that got tested at the end of the game to win it in overtime for the Indianapolis Colts against the Broncos. And then you talk also about one other game against the Raiders. And the Raiders where Devontae Adams, was testing him at the end of the game, and Stephon Gilmore answered the call. That's been Stephon Gilmore all year. Stephon Gilmore has answered in some of the biggest moments for the Indianapolis Colts. And I am amazed at what he's been able to do this year. We talk about his age, and he's getting up there in age, but he just looks like a player that can still do it, man. He still looks like a guy he was one of the best shutdown corners in NFL this year. No doubt about it. So fantastic work by Stephon Gilmore. Grover Stewart is another one. Grover Stewart, stat-wise, improved in every category this year. Combined tackles was his number 1 year. Assisted tackles, sacks, tackles for loss. Like some of those big plays, especially early in the year, Grover Stewart was just a force to be reckoned with in the run game. Like nobody wanted to run it towards Grover Stewart because of what Grover Stewart was doing to offensive linemen. Grover Stewart doing a fantastic job of improving. Hope that he continues to improve on his play. And of course, an honorable mention I feel like I should mention here is Jelani Woods. Jelani Woods, while, some people had higher expectations than what he gave, I think that a lot of us can sit back now and say that he is an overachiever because we honestly thought going into the season, we thought that Jelani Woods might end up being like the guy that might get left off the roster. Like there was a point when Mo Alley Cox, Kylan Granson were the 1 and 2. And then you had Drew Ogletree playing better than Jelani was in the off season, in training camp, and was outperforming him in a lot of different ways. And Drew Ogletree, to most people, thought was going to be the number 3 tight end. And Jelani was just going to get put on the practice squad or something. To see what Jelani has gone through early in the season to what he has been able to do throughout the season when he has been given opportunities to do that, I think that speaks volumes to the player that he is and what he has been able to do. So that's an overachiever. And one more overachiever that I will mention before we move on, 2 more actually, and it's both defensive players again. Surprise, surprise. That is Rodney McLeod. I think a lot of people thought Rodney McLeod was going to be a good player for us for this year, but I think a lot of people didn't quite expect what Rodney McLeod did for this defense, having very sound game play, and I'm love that what Rodney McLeod has done for this team. And Gus Bradley, I think, deserves an overachiever award for losing your best defensive player for the entire year. You lose that turnover factor already, and to have to go in with several different issues and do what you did, especially from middle of the season to now, the defense was a great improvement. So I think Gus Bradley deserves some praise for that. Now let's go to the underachievers, right? And this can range from anywhere, guys. We can literally pull out a name out of a hat at this point to who it is because you can blame anything and everything, right? Underachiever, you talk about Chris Ballard, you talk about the coaches, right? We'll talk about a few of those. But the number one thing you have to talk about is Matt Ryan, right? the quarterback being an underachiever because of the fact that we thought Matt Ryan was going to come in and be a very solidified piece. He was going to come in, restore balance to the offense, and be able to make plays that mattered and be able to identify things on defense, on offense, and be able to make the easy plays, right? And all season we have not seen that. Matt Ryan, there has been a few games where Matt Ryan really showed you some things for sure, but for the majority of the season, you've gotten a quarterback that lacked arm strength, lacked willingness to expand the field. You had a guy that looked like, because of the offensive line, which we're going to get to in a second, looked like a deer in headlights at times, didn't know what to do, and ultimately became a turnover machine. Ended up turning the ball over 20 times by himself, double digit interceptions, double digit fumbles. I mean, there's the guy has been a walking turnover all season and has also, I think, not played in about 5 games now. So you look at it from that perspective. I mean, it was really bad with Matt Ryan. A lot of the stability that we were hoping from Matt Ryan, he did ultimately not bring. And through a lot of different reasons, it was because of coaching, because of offensive line. I get that. But you also have to take credit for the fact that Matt Ryan didn't make things any easier for this team. Now, going to one of the biggest reasons why Matt Ryan wasn't the way he was because of the offensive line. And I mean, honestly, the entire offensive line deserves blame here because there's not a single person on this that's not guilty of being part of this regime and how it has happened for this team. Obviously, since week 12, the Indianapolis Colts have actually been one of the better offensive lines. It's been more like, week 11 or so. Since then, at the late end of the season, the Colts have actually become a pretty solid offensive line. They haven't been great. They haven't been bad. They've been solid, which, is still kind of an underperformance based on what you're paying some of these players, right? And we don't pay these players the way we are right now for them to be solid. We want them to be a great offensive line because you're paying Quentin Nelson and Braden Smith and Ryan Kelly all this money, and it's just not working out. So that is something that you definitely need to look at going into the offseason on what you're going to do with this, because we can't have this offensive line underachieving like this again, especially with the fact that, you might be bringing in a new quarterback and they need to be protected. And Chris Strauser is another name to mix in with the O-line. Again, he has not done his job as an offensive line coach to getting these guys ready. That's on him a little bit, and he needs to be at fault for that. Some of the other players that you got to talk about, Michael Pittman, another player, again, the guy that's been the veteran on this offense for one of the longest, from a skill player position standpoint. I know that this is only his 3rd year, but, Michael Pittman, that last year with Carson Wentz, there were times when Michael Pittman was showing you glimpses that he could become a number 1 wide receiver. And then even in the offseason, we saw Michael Pittman, balling against our secondary. Matt Ryan and Michael Pittman looking like they had the connection down. And sure enough, Michael Pittman's numbers have been down. Michael Pittman has had 2 touchdowns all year. Michael Pittman has had a lot of severe drops, a lot of missed blocks, a lot of missed assignments. Just hasn't been a dominant threat that this passing game really needs him to be. So that's why he's an underachiever. Mo Alley-Cox is another one. For fault of his own and non-fault of his own, he hasn't been involved in the offensive game plan. And you're paying this guy some of the most money of your entire offense. And Mo Alley-Cox has, I think, been averaging like one target a game at this point. Throughout the whole season. He has not had any success. You don't use him in the red zone. You don't use him anywhere besides blocking. That's the only thing you use him for. And it's not the fact that if that's what the Colts want him to be, then that's okay. I'm fine with him being that. But you're paying him a lot more money than what a lot of other teams are paying their tight ends. And he's not giving you production in the passing game. There's only been one game where Mo Cox even made an impact, and it was against the Tennessee Titans. And I believe it was week 4. And you still ended up losing that game because you couldn't score over 20 points. But Mo Cox had 2 touchdowns in that game. So again, Mo Cox not been involved in the offense, getting paid too much for what he's had to deal with. And 2 defensive players that definitely have been underachievers this year, Brandon Faison being one of them. Brandon Faison, I know a lot of people, we didn't know what to expect with Brandon Faison coming over, but Brandon Faison has been one of the worst corners in almost every metric by PFF and a bunch of others. It's been literally one of the worst graded corners in all of the NFL. So very much an underachiever. And Kenny Moore as well is the big one, right? Because Kenny Moore, off of 2, ever since he's been to Indy, has had phenomenal seasons. Has been named to the Pro Bowl last year. As a guy that played some really fantastic football over the last several years. And we have seen him just collapse this year amid the contract controversy that we had in the offseason with him and Chris Ballard not wanting to pay him at the moment. Now it may seem like we may never get to see him get paid. There's that. And then, of course, when we're talking about with the offensive coaching, that's something that's got to improve over the offseason. We know there's going to be a new head coach potentially getting hired, new coordinators, new bunch of different things. So, of course, things have to go right for Indy and the coaching staff department because it was the second worst offense, if not potentially the worst offense in the NFL this year. And it has only gotten worse since Jeff Saturday came here. So a lot of things into consideration. This team needs to improve from that perspective. But that's going to do it for this one, guys. Let me know who you believe was an overachiever this year and who was an underachiever this year. I'm curious to know your guys' thoughts. We may revisit this at some point. But thank you guys again so much for the continued support. We greatly appreciate it. Let me know what you think of the video. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. All that good stuff. And as always, guys, go Colts.